how is this just not obvious to everybody at this point? Like, why isn't it a completely accepted norm in the same way that Meir has curly hair or the sun rises in the morning? Radical is bad for society. Why is that something that has to be so controversial and we can't say out loud? And the people who do are deemed courageous for daring to put their life on the line to try and fight back against groups like ISIS, Taliban, Qatar, radical Islam, etc., etc., etc. I'm really struggling to understand why it is that this is not just completely accepted everywhere we go, that they are trying to dominate and take over in the most revolting and scary way, and all of us need to understand that this is enemy number one, and we have to figure out how to fight it. I know we're dealing with all these internal conflicts and these issues at home. Every society has them, and there's a lot of energy and focus that needs to be on that as well. But when you see the reality of what terrorism looks like and how it's trying to dominate from within and how they're using our love for freedom and openness of religion to just come in and take over, our care for children to throw immigration at us at such a rate that our society loses all of its color, to infiltrate with ideas of like multiculturalism being something that we should really celebrate, instead of the understanding that multiculturalism in certain extents has benefits to it, but is absolutely not the be-all and end-all. And the fact that they're hiding stories of children and females being raped and murdered, etc., etc., etc. Why is it not normalized that this is a massive problem? I think part of normalizing it is having more and more and more of these conversations and watching more content that just talks out about it in a way that makes all of us realize, okay, this is true. And that's why I believe that we need to be celebrating and watching more and more people who have the courage to speak out against this. And that's exactly why we're going to review this next video, which I think does a superb job at reminding everybody, hello, look at what you're up against. But before we do that, have you subscribed to our channel? You already know the drill. If you've been here before, just hit that subscribe button. Join our movement. We are all in this together to fight back against the insane radical movements that are trying to take over and to provide radically rational commentary in response. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Let's dive right in.
I don't want big government. I want strong government.
Stronger, okay.
There's a big difference between those two.
So
a strong government is a government that doesn't fluff these important conversations. I don't want a gigantic Department of Education. Yeah. What I want, though, is for people to recognize that immigration, when it comes in large clusters from different parts of the world, comes with different value sets.
Amen.
And you mentioned multiculturalism. My view, and it's important to distinguish between the two, there's a multi-ethnic society. That's a society in which you have black people, brown people, white people. And there's a multicultural society in which inevitably you get to the point where all cultures are equal.
Yeah. Which is
okay. I don't know if you all know who this is. Konstantin Kisin, right? The team from Trigonometry, absolutely amazing, brilliant, everything they do. And this guy is Nick Freitas, who is also wonderful.
Garbage.
That doesn't, and that just simply does not work. The reason America, as an outsider, in my opinion, has worked as well as it has, is that immigrants from past generations would come here. What would they do? Number one, they would teach their children, we are now American. A lot of them would change their names to become more Americanized. A lot of them would no longer speak the language of their home country at home with their children, to encourage their children to integrate. To the point now where there are Italian Americans, but are there ghettos of Italian Americans? Yeah. Are there ghettos of Irish Americans? Are there neighborhoods where you can only be elected, or big if you're Italian?
Yeah.
By the way, I love this point. I think oftentimes we hear this multiculturalism, like, yeah, that's wonderful. Let's bring lots of cultures and mishmash them together. The beauty of different cultures is when each culture stays strong in its own culture, and then we can combine and decide how that works, not when the cultures are completely eroded. What he's saying here is that if you want different people to come in, different ethnicities to come in and succeed together, there has to be a unifying factor. Interestingly enough, Israel is often the example of this. How you bring so many different Jews that all come from such different cultures together? Well, because they're united by the fact that we're Jews. And it keeps us together despite our differences, and it allows people to celebrate their differences. What's happening in the United States is different. These people are not coming in and saying, okay, we want to find a unifying factor. Yes, we speak Italian. Yes, we are Muslim. Yes, we are different. Yes, we're Jewish. We want to just come in and be American first and bring in our other identities and create something beautiful from that. What they're saying is we want to come in with our culture and we want to dominate it, and we're actually anti-American, meaning we are coming in to take over. That's where multiculturalism doesn't really work.
Not really, right? So that is the destination. And the question is, are all cultures equally capable of getting there? And I would put it to you, our experience in Europe is that unless you are very, very, very forceful about breaking up the ghettos that automatically get created when people migrate in large numbers, probably not. And then that means you do have to violate an element of the classical liberal thing, which is, all people are the same or all people are equal. They're not. And you have to start recognizing that if you're going to save your country.
Yeah. I think we've, one of the things that's been interesting is you look at the immigration issue in the UK versus the immigration in the United States. It's very different. It's similar that we have massive problems with illegal immigration. But I'm looking at the numbers and I'm seeing this, the numbers from North Africa, from the Middle East, and even from places like Albania, where you go look at the British prison system, and it's pretty easy to see where the main problem spots are happening. Then when you had things like the various grooming gangs that were taking place in the UK, there's no denying that there is a connection there, a cultural connection there between the way one culture views young British girls, and versus the way Britain views their young girls, and it was amazing to watch this almost slavish response coming from elements of the classical liberal tradition, which more on the woke, more on the progressive side, but still of that classical liberal tradition, that were just insisting that, well, how dare you? When you look at these numbers over here, we see that there's a small. And everyone is looking at him like, are you insane? Like there is very clearly a connection here. It's a connection they don't deny in more honest conversations. So why is it that we're not allowed to have that conversation? And
I think this is, again, something to think about. Why is it that they don't deny? Why is it that it has to be our people who deny? Because I think it makes our people uncomfortable. Like, we don't know how to handle this, so let's just like everybody. We don't know how to handle the fact that maybe some people are better than other people, or some people are more dangerous to society. That doesn't work with our idealism. They are very clear on the fact that they believe that there are differences, that they're better than others, and therefore they're willing to say these things publicly. But because we're so uncomfortable dealing with our own truth, that we, our own societies, are the people who wish-wash on it, and they use that as our weakness.
it immediately goes back to, well, because if you do that, you're violating this universal principle that all people are equal. And I think some of the response here is, well, no, I can believe that all people are equal in the sense that they have equal value before God, that they should have equal protection before the law to the extent that they fall within the jurisdiction of that law. But cultures are not equal. They don't give the same answers to all the same existential questions that we face. Right. So why do you think? Because this has become a major source of, again, all three of these categories, a lot of infighting about where we should go, what we should do, but they've all seemed to kind of agreed on this point that there was a fundamental flaw in this kind of, maybe you might even say overly libertarian interpretation, which is just, oh yeah, the free flow of goods and people, and when we'll all be happy. Do you think the main sticking point as it differentiates between Western civilization in Europe and specifically in the UK has, again, we have a lot of Hispanic people coming in the United States, but there's a lot of actually shared values there. Not all. There's definitely different cultural things that are manifesting themselves. But Catholic versus a largely Protestant nation, traditional family structures, traditional ideas of, what husbands and wives should do in raising kids and working hard and all of that. And then all of a sudden you go to Dearborn, Michigan, or you go into Minnesota right now and you look at some of the things happening there. It's like, whoa, how is this ever going to be assimilated? And it's large of it is Islamist. Like I have people that I served with in the military who are Muslim, who are very, very proud Americans. And I will have people, well, that's because they're not properly following their faith. I'm like, okay, I'm happy to have that conversation. But one thing I have noticed is that the more people, if they get their primary identity from Islam, there seems to be a general incompatibility with the very classical liberalism that is, like to your, inviting people here that are not interested in assimilating. Is that a fair representation of what's been happening in the UK? Is that the type of immigrants coming are, by virtue of their culture and their religious faith, not interested in assimilating into English culture or British culture?
These are generalized statements, of course.
Yes.
So it's difficult to talk about it without being nuanced. But I think if we're being really honest, Nick, and I think this is just a statement of fact, a lot of people don't like to say it because it makes people uncomfortable. No one in Europe gives a shit about mass immigration. It's
really?
Not really. Not really. We let in hundreds across the continent of Europe, millions of Ukrainians. Where are the Ukrainian crime waves? We let in hundreds of thousands of Hong Kongers into Britain. Did that affect Britain? British people are not concerned about Hong Kongers or Ukrainians. The problem in Europe is Islam. That's what people are really fearful of. And that's what's going on.
I was listening.
Good for him. What a hard thing to say. That is a hard thing to say. It's not an immigration problem. By the way, again, similar with Israel. We don't have a problem with people who are different to Jews living here. Just don't try and kill us. That's the same thing in Europe. That's what everybody's starting to realize. In the same way that America doesn't have a problem with people with different religions. You don't hear lots of conversation about the Buddhists that live there or the people who are, I don't know, Chinese and not Christian. You don't hear a lot of conversation about that because they're not causing havoc. They're not trying to change society to become an Islamic state. That is the problem that most people have. That is it. That's it. It's nothing to do with immigration. You can have people influx into your society if they want to be part of your society and contribute to it. But when they want to take it over with radical, crazy ideas, that's when it becomes a problem.
You guys' interview with Tommy Robinson. It was a very, controversial character, and he was even saying, he goes, I don't think it's multiculturalism. And that shocked me because everything I've ever heard of Tommy Robinson was like, oh yeah, he just wants a white Britain. And then I'm listening to the guy talk about it. It's like, well, that's not what he's saying. He's, in fact, one of the reasons why I understood he kind of left some of the organizations he was previously associated with, which were some pretty shady organizations, was in part because he would bring his ethnic friends to the meeting and they weren't invited. And it was like, whoa, this is not what I'm down for. But he'd even said, I'm not trying to get you to like pick a side on this, but it was just shocking to me to hear someone like Tommy Robinson, which has been caricatured a certain way, say, no, I don't got a problem with immigration. I got a problem with this type of immigration because it refuses to assimilate. And do you think that more and more, I mean, I'm seeing this more and more in the UK, at least from what we see in American media and social media. Actually, not in American media, it's what we see on social media. But it also seems like it's happening in Germany, it's happening in France, and there seems to be a pretty straight line being drawn toward it's immigrants from Islamic countries and cultures who identify that way. Their primary source of their identity is Islam, that are just not interested in assimilating. And I feel like for the first time in my lifetime, it's become okay to say that. Do you think that's just because the evidence has become so overwhelming?
Yeah, I think the issue is when you look at everything that has been happening through the UK with the protests after October 7th. Literally the next day, there was a protest. Well, it wasn't a protest. It was a celebration of the slaughter of over 1,000 Jewish people. You look at the grooming gangs, and the part of the reason, and people actually don't address this enough, as to why there hasn't been an inquiry and why we haven't spoken about it and governments haven't addressed it, and people talk about political correctness. There was a large-scale cover-up as to what was happening. Yeah. And if we're going to have a real inquiry and we're going to have a proper discussion about it, which we haven't yet, then the reality is some people are going to be exposed as knowing what was going on, at best turning a blind eye, and at worst actively encouraging, if not profiting from it. So there's a very, very, very dark aspect to the grooming gangs that we haven't yet addressed, because there's local councillors involved in this, local councils, local politicians, police force, schools, care homes, This is a rot and a cancer which goes right to the heart of our establishment and right to the heart of the systems of government throughout our country. And that's a part of the grooming gangs that we haven't yet spoken about, because once we do, you're going to see a lot of people, particularly people now who are, doing very well in politics and other areas of life, who started off in those, local councils 20 or so years ago, or, and they were a police officer, and now they're at the head of a particular police force. But 20 or so years ago, they were either involved or they were negligent, or they just simply turned a blind eye to this.
Yeah, and just to add one thing, coming back to the conversation of how do you move forward, which is what you're about, right? Is I think part of the reason that the things that Francis just described happened is that because supremacist ideologies are intolerable to our mindset, we don't know what to do with the supremacist ideology. We have interviewed a number of victims of these grooming gangs who all explained that the reason that they were targeted and while they were being abused in the way that they were, their race and ethnicity, and in some cases Christianity, was the reason that their perpetrators felt entitled to behave this way. Because
look, it's very simple. There is a few things going on here. Number one, a group of people who are trying to come in and dominate and take over because they believe that they are better than everybody else, and that anybody who doesn't bow down to them or become one of them needs to be removed from the world. That is their religious belief. And in that way, the religion is different to other religions. And there's nothing we can do about it at this point. It's just a simple fact. And there's an overwhelming amount of evidence against this. Most people are not racist towards other people just because they are different towards them. Most people don't like immigrants because immigrants come in with violence and grooming gangs and new ideals that they try and take over our society. That's where immigrants are a problem. When immigrants just come in legally and try and contribute and assimilate, then it's all fine. But really, at the root of all this is the fact that internally people have covered up the fact that they allowed for this to happen and to expand. And now we're all dealing with it. And hopefully this type of conversations are going to become more and more normal. I find it flabbergasting that these three people, they're so afraid to talk about it. They're so careful with what they say, because maybe if they say something out of context, it will be perceived the wrong way. When it's just like, guys, say it. We'll need to be able to say it. Radical Islam is coming into our societies at a crazy rate with a plan of taking over. And if we want to fight it, we have to get over being politically correct. We just have to humbly accept the truth and realize that it is our time to call it out and fight back. Thank you for your attention to this matter.